Before we begin, let me ask you something real. Have you ever been the one your entire family depended on until the day you finally said no? This is the story of the moment everything changed. The night a quiet black woman who'd held her family together for years finally stepped back and watched the truth unfold. It's a story about boundaries, betrayal, growth, and unexpected healing. A story that reminds us that choosing yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes, it's the only way to save everyone. Now, let's begin. My name is Marceline Pryor, and at 34 years old, I didn't expect New Year's Eve to become the night I felt something colder than winter settle in my bones. One moment, I was raising my champagne flute in my parents' dining room. The next, the stem dug into my palms so tightly that I wondered whether it would crack. Every year, my mother insisted on hosting the Pryor family countdown, a tradition she claimed brought us luck, even though the only people benefiting from that luck were the ones draining me dry. Mom stood at the head of the oversized oak table like she was about to announce a cruise or a wedding. She thrived on attention, loved being the sun the rest of us were supposed to orbit. Behind her, the muted TV replayed some generic countdown promo. The younger cousins sprawled on the floor with foam swords and wooden blocks, arguing over which superhero was stronger. Dad leaned back, one leg crossed over the other, wearing a smug grin that said he already knew what was coming. He always did. Nothing in that house ever blindsided him. Only me. To Mom's right sat my older sister Rochelle, shoulders drawn inward just enough to look tired, but never enough to look responsible. Her twins were always everyone's concern, but somehow never hers. Across from her, barely visible behind a tall candle, sat Jory, our youngest sister. She cupped her glass like she wished she could shrink into it. Mom tapped her fork against her flute, dainty, rehearsed, theatrical. Everyone went silent. She cleared her throat, lifted her chin, and said the sentence that changed the direction of my entire year. "Your sister is under too much pressure," she declared, gaze fixed on me. "Starting now, you will be covering Rochelle's housing expenses." Just like that. Like she was giving out chores. Like my income was a family resource. Like decisions about my money required only their vote, not my consent. For a moment, I truly thought I'd misheard her. I glanced around the table, waiting for somebody to scoff, to chuckle, to say, "Girl, stop playing." Nobody did. Rochelle didn't even blink. She didn't say, "Mom, that's not fair," or "Let's talk about this privately." She just stared at her plate like she'd expected this outcome, maybe even helped script it. Jory lowered her eyes to the tablecloth, shoulders tightening. She never defended me, not out of malice, but because avoiding conflict was her personal religion. The kids kept playing, oblivious to the way the ground shifted beneath the adults. Then Dad leaned forward, voice flat, tone final. "If you refuse," he said, "don't bother coming back here again." There it was. The real blade behind the announcement. That was the moment I realized this wasn't spontaneous. They had planned every word, rehearsed it, chose New Year's Eve intentionally. The one night I always showed up, the one night they assumed I'd stay quiet to keep the peace and avoid ruining the holiday. They genuinely believed I'd swallow it, like I had so many times before. But something inside me went eerily still. I raised my flute, not a tremor in my voice, and said, "Then this is goodbye. And good luck funding your chaos." I placed the glass neatly on the table without taking a sip, stood, and walked out. I left my coat on the rack, my scarf draped over a chair, and every expectation they had of me sitting there next to the half-cold roast and glittering decorations. The night air outside was brutal and crisp, biting at my cheeks, but I didn't feel a thing. For the first time in years, my vision was clear. What my family didn't know, or pretended not to know, was that I had already been sending Rochelle $1,800 a month since early spring. At first, I offered it. She was struggling after her divorce, promising she just needed help staying stable for the twins. Stability, in her world, meant ignoring job applications and asking me for temporary assistance that quietly dragged into almost a year. But it didn't stop there. When school fees were overdue. A text from Mom. When Rochelle forgot electricity deadlines. A call from Dad. When Mom couldn't afford groceries. My card on file. Receipts filled with specialty pastries and boxed cocktails instead of basics. When Dad needed quick cash for a repair that never materialized. Sent. No discussion. When Rochelle rushed her youngest to urgent care, I covered the deductible. And every time it wasn't "can you help?" It was "you'll take care of it, right?" At some point, my salary stopped being my own and became an unofficial family lifeline. They treated my income like community property, shared, expected, unacknowledged. But that night, walking away from that table, something fundamental inside me snapped back into place. The next morning, in my quiet apartment, over a warm mug of cinnamon coffee, I opened my banking app and canceled the automated transfer to Rochelle. Gone with one tap. No explanation. No warning. I wanted her to feel the shift. By noon, the first text arrived. "Hey, something's off with the rent." Nothing went through. 2 hours later. Still nothing. Did something happen? Calls followed. Straight to voicemail. The last voicemail she left was 6 minutes of sobbing, breathy blame, and emotional gymnastics. "You know how stressed I am. You're making things worse. I can't believe you'd do this to me or the twins." The twins. Always the twins. Always used as shields. By that afternoon, Mom called. Not to ask if I was warm. Not to ask why I left coatless into the night. Not to apologize for blindsiding me. She called to scold me. "You embarrassed this entire family," she snapped. "In front of your nieces and your father. You hurt Rochelle more than you understand." I held the phone away, stared at my wall, then brought it back. "I'm not paying another cent," I replied calmly. Mom went silent for one beat, then hung up. No goodbye. By the end of the week, my phone looked like a battlefield. Missed calls. Red notification bubbles stacking like accusations. Only one message came, without judgment. "Jory, you okay?" I stared at that text for a long time before replying. "I'm good. Better, honestly." She didn't reply. But she also didn't add to the noise. And that silence? That silence was full. Full of everything they'd taken. Full of everything they assumed. Full of all the roles they assigned me without permission. And it was only the beginning. Rochelle's meltdown was loud online, but quiet in real life. She didn't call to understand. She called to demand. On social media, however, she made herself a martyr. Within days, her entire profile turned into a gallery of heartbreak aesthetic, moody quotes about family betrayal, lyrics about false love, captions about raising kids with no support. Her friends flooded her comments with virtual sympathy. "You're so strong. Keep going, Mama. You don't deserve this." Not one of them knew she had been receiving nearly a year of steady help from me. Not one of them knew she still refused to work. Not one of them knew she'd argued harder for excuses than effort. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't comment. I just scrolled and closed the app. What I didn't tell the family, not Rochelle, not Mom, not Dad, not even Jory, was that I hadn't stopped at her rent. If they wanted to treat me like the family ATM, then the machine was powering down. I canceled the $300 Mom claimed she needed each month for medication, conveniently aligned with her weekend winery trips. I stopped the $250 Dad guilt me into sending for house maintenance, the same leak he'd been fixing for 2 years with no visible change. I called the twin school and removed my name from every fee, every emergency contact, every automatic charge. If something came due, they would have to call the actual parent. None of this was punishment. It was consequence. People who lean on others for too long forget their own legs. A few days later, Mom emailed me. Not texted, emailed, as if using formal formatting made her message more righteous. It started with, "Marceline C. Pryor." Never a good sign. She listed all their supposed sacrifices. "We paid for your college applications. We supported you after your first heartbreak. We were there when you started your job." She wrote paragraphs about Rochelle's emotional fatigue, claiming I couldn't possibly understand her trauma. Then came the line that made every muscle in my jaw tighten at once. This is not about money. This is about being a decent human being. Decency. A word they only used when I stopped giving them access to my wallet. I stared at the email, thinking about every quiet deposit I'd made, every bill I covered, every emergency I handled without thanks. When I said yes, I was a good daughter. The moment I said no, I became selfish. That realization sat in my chest like ice. So I called the only person in the family who didn't twist the truth, Jory. She answered on the second ring, voice small. What's up?
I didn't waste time.
Is Rochelle even looking for a job? The pause was long enough for me to hear the hum of her ceiling fan. No, she said finally. She's not. That was all I needed. I cut everyone off, I told her. No more rent. No more extras. No more ghost payments. Nothing. Jory inhaled like she was preparing to argue, but instead she exhaled slowly and whispered, Honestly, you're doing the right thing. The softness in her voice caught me off guard. It was the first time any family member had ever said I was right without trying to guilt-trip me afterward. But I didn't tell her I'd gone further. I didn't tell her every quiet doorway they used to siphon money had already been sealed. Instead, I let the silence between us finally mean something. Because in that silence, something was beginning to shift. For the next week, my phone stayed eerily quiet. No begging. No accusations. No frantic calls disguised as concern. It wasn't peace. It was anticipation. A hush before the storm. I knew it. They knew it. Everyone was waiting to see who would make the next move. But I didn't move. For the first time in my life, I wasn't patching their holes or soothing their chaos. I let the stillness stretch. Let them feel the absence of the person who had been holding everything together behind the scenes. That's when they shifted their attention. Not to Dad, he avoided accountability like a sport. Not to Mom, she was too committed to her victim role. Not even to Rochelle, who insisted she was drowning. They turned toward the easiest target.
Jory.
Sweet, quiet, peacekeeping Jory. The one who apologized for things she didn't do. The one they knew was terrified of conflict. She called me one night, whispering like she was hiding in a closet. Mars, Mom called me 3 times today. What did she want? Though I already knew. She said, Someone in this family needs to step up now that you've walked away. Her voice cracked. She said I should cover Rochelle's rent. I closed my eyes. And Dad, she whispered, he told me I'm responsible now. That if I don't help, I'm just as cold as you. The words didn't hurt. They just confirmed everything I already knew about them. Jory, I said, you don't owe them anything. Silence stretched between us. Then she exhaled, fragile and tired. I know. I'm just worn out. For the first time, protectiveness flared inside me, not toward Rochelle, not toward Mom or Dad, but toward Jory. She was finally seeing the truth. A few days later, I got a text from her. I applied for a couple jobs today. I stopped mid-step in my kitchen. Jory hadn't held a job since her youngest was born. Everyone in the family assumed she'd stay home forever, and she let them make decisions for her because it kept the peace. But now she was choosing differently. 3 days later, I got hired. Just part-time, but it's something. For the first time in weeks, I smiled at my phone. This was what true change looked like. Not theatrics. Not manipulation. Not begging. Just small steps toward responsibility. While Jory was rising, Rochelle was unraveling. Her posts grew more dramatic. Her complaints more public. And then Mom created something that made my blood go cold. A fundraiser. Title, Keeping a Struggling Mother Afloat. Goal, $7,500. Photo, Rochelle holding her twins with a wounded smile. Story, a narrative implying she had been abandoned by someone she trusted. They didn't just twist the truth. They rewrote it entirely. But I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I didn't react. I just whispered, of course, and kept scrolling. The fundraiser barely gained traction. Small donations trickled in, but nothing significant. And then people started asking questions. Real questions. Why is Rochelle in this position? Where is her family? Why does her story sound unfinished? That's when the cracks in my family's facade began to show. Dad started posting passive-aggressive rants about financial discipline. Mom canceled her annual wellness retreat, claiming she wanted to stay close to family. Dad grumbled about rising costs louder than usual. Jory filled in the blanks during our late-night calls. They're stressed, she said. Like really stressed. What about Rochelle? I asked. She tried to drop the twins off at Mom and Dad's house without asking. Just texted and drove off. I rubbed my forehead. And Mom told her she wasn't a babysitter. Dad started yelling. Rochelle yelled. Neighbors heard. Jory had rushed over just to stop the noise. The image of it all, years of tension finally snapping, wasn't surprising. Just sad. The next text Jory sent made me pause. They're falling apart, and for once, I'm not in the middle. 5 minutes later. I worked a double today. I'm exhausted, but proud. And just like that, the roles in our family shifted. The one who spiraled, Rochelle, was sinking. The one who avoided responsibility, Jory, was rising. The ones who demanded control, Mom and Dad, were unraveling. And all because I finally said one word. No. What none of us expected came next. Rochelle posted a photo of an eviction notice. Bold red letters taped to her door. Caption: Some people just don't care. Thousands of reactions. Hundreds of comments. Sympathy everywhere. But I just stared at the image and felt nothing. Not guilt. Not shock. Not sadness. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning of consequences catching up. And they still had no idea how much further everything was about to fall. Rochelle's eviction didn't explode the way people imagined. There was no chaos in the streets. No shouting match with building managers. No dramatic scene for neighbors to gossip about. It happened quietly, embarrassingly quietly. Jory told me she got the call late one evening. Rochelle's voice was flat, almost numb. They're forcing us out. Not crying. Not raging. Just defeated. By the time Jory arrived, the twins sat on the curb with backpacks, kicking at stray leaves. Rochelle was surrounded by half-filled trash bags and a bent laundry basket. Smudged eyeliner. Hair frizzy from sweat and stress. Muttering under her breath about fake family and people who don't care. She never mentioned my name. She didn't need to. Within an hour, they were on my parents' doorstep, dragging suitcases, oversized totes, and the weight of every unchecked decision Rochelle had made. Mom and Dad weren't expecting them. They hadn't prepared a room. The house felt wrong the moment they stepped in. Jory said it was like walking into a pressure cooker. The twins ended up sleeping on a thin mattress in Mom's old sewing room, next to dusty fabric bins and an abandoned quilting machine she swore she'd use someday. By the second day of Rochelle living there, Jory texted me. They're losing it. Mom couldn't handle 2 energetic kids in her space. Dad barked at Rochelle every hour. You need a real job, not excuses. Rochelle fired back with her usual line. I'm overwhelmed. I can't think straight. It was the same cycle as always, just louder, messier, and now compressed into a single house. But then something happened that none of us expected. Not me. Not Jory. Not even Rochelle. Her ex-husband reappeared. The man who vanished almost a year ago. The one everyone assumed was off in another state reinventing himself. The one Rochelle insisted had abandoned the twins entirely. He showed up at my parents' house with a folder in hand. A custody petition. Filed. Signed. Official. Jory's voice trembled when she called me. He wants full custody. I sat up straight. Is he serious? Mars, he came with paperwork. Real paperwork. Job records. Pictures of his apartment. Proof he's been sober for 9 months. Letters from people who've watched him rebuild his life. A slow, cold tension spread across my chest. Not because I wanted him to win, I didn't know him well enough to care either way. But because this was the first consequence in months that wasn't about money. This was real. This could change lives. Mom was apparently sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Dad locked himself in the garage. Rochelle was in full hysteria. But none of them called me. Not until hours later. 6 missed calls from Rochelle. 5 from Mom. 3 from Dad. Then a voicemail from Rochelle, her voice thin, terrified.
Marceline, please.
I know we messed up. I know things got ugly. But I need my sister.
Please.
Please help me. I listened to it twice. Not out of guilt, but because I didn't recognize her tone. Rochelle didn't plead. She blamed. She demanded. She accused. This voice. This was someone who finally hit the bottom of a hole they kept digging. Mom's voicemail followed. Just 6 words. We really messed up. All of us. No theatrics. No self-righteousness. Just fear. That shook me more than the custody papers. Because if my mother was finally seeing the truth, then reality had fallen harder than even I realized. While the house imploded, while Rochelle unraveled, while Mom cried and Dad hid, Jory kept growing. Quietly.
Steadily. Consistently.
She picked up more shifts at work, applied for childcare assistance, opened a separate checking account under only her name, asked me about online classes and digital certifications. Every time she texted, it wasn't about crisis, it was about progress. I finished the resume workshop. I found a budgeting app. I'm thinking about part-time school. I paid all my bills this month. Every message felt like dawn breaking. While the rest of the family sank deeper, Jory climbed. Then came the moment that almost felt symbolic. Dad started selling his old tools, the ones he'd spent decades swearing he'd pass down to his grandson someday. Turns out his retirement plan was a myth he'd built off the assumption that I'd always cover the gaps. Mom stopped posting brunch and vacation photos entirely. Her social media went silent, like she didn't have the energy to pretend anymore. Rochelle was spiraling like a storm funnel. One day she was rage posting. The next, she was begging Jory to watch the twins. The next, she asked Mom and Dad if they could temporarily take the kids until the hearing. It was collapse in slow motion, but also fast. Everything falling at once. Jory said something one evening I'll never forget. They're crumbling, she whispered. But I think you were the only thing holding this family together. And they didn't even know. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Because deep down, I'd always known. I'd been the glue. And when I stopped forcing myself to stick between their cracks, they finally split open. But cracks are funny things. Sometimes they let light in. And the first light was shining through Jory. Her growth. Her courage. Her self-accountability. For the first time in my life, one of my sisters wasn't draining me. She was inspiring me. And the family? They were about to face something even they weren't prepared for. A life without my support. And without the illusions they built to hide their own choices. Because this wasn't the end of the fallout. It was the beginning. 3 days after Rochelle's eviction, the family hit a kind of collective free fall. Arguments erupted daily at my parents' house. Not small disagreements, full-blown clashes from dawn until midnight. Mom snapped at Rochelle for leaving dishes in the sink. Dad shouted over the twins' noise. Rochelle stormed from room to room blaming everyone except herself. Jory texted me constantly with updates. They're breaking down. Mom's losing her patience. Dad's yelling every hour. The twins are confused, but in the chaos, Jory's voice grew steadier. She sounded different, grounded, confident, independent in a way I'd never heard before. Then, on a cloudy Thursday morning, change arrived quietly. Rochelle posted a blurry photo online, an eviction letter taped crookedly to a beige apartment door, captioned, "Some people don't care about family." It went viral among her circle. Prayer hands. Broken heart emojis. Stay strong, sis. You'll rise again. God gives his hardest battles. But I didn't feel shame, or guilt, or anger. I felt clarity. Because all of it was the result of choices. Not mine. Hers. The fallout kept shifting. That night, Rochelle's ex-husband arrived again. This time with a lawyer. He planned to request temporary custody until the hearing. He'd come prepared with witnesses, receipts, character statements. Mom screamed at him. Dad argued until his voice disappeared. Rochelle sobbed so loudly the twins cried with her. But none of them called me. Not until hours later. When the dust settled, I received 6 missed calls from Rochelle, 5 from Mom, 3 from Dad, and finally, a voicemail from Rochelle. Her voice was fragile, raw, stripped of pride. Marceline, please. I'm scared. I know I hurt you. I know I took advantage. But I need you.
Please.
I need my sister. I replayed it twice. Not because I felt sentimental, but because I didn't recognize her. It wasn't manipulation.
It wasn't self-pity.
It was fear. Mom's voicemail came next. We ruin things. All of us. We see that now. That message, that one shook me. My mother rarely ever admitted fault. If she was doing it now, it meant the foundation of the family was cracking in ways I couldn't see yet. Meanwhile, Jory was transforming quietly. She worked early shifts, joined a financial literacy webinar, found childcare assistance through a local nonprofit, opened a savings account she controlled alone, started researching online degrees. Her texts weren't drama-filled. They were full of momentum. I got approved for the program. I reorganized my schedule. I'm learning budgeting techniques. Every message from her felt like a small victory, a sunrise pushing through all the darkness. While Jory was rising, the rest of the house was sinking. Dad pawning tools he once swore were heirlooms. Mom canceling outings and hiding her stress behind thin smiles. Rochelle swinging between anger and desperation. It was like watching dominoes fall, slow, inevitable, unstoppable. Jory told me something that stayed with me. They're falling apart, Mars, but I think you were the only stability they had. They just never gave you credit for it. I stayed quiet. She wasn't wrong. I had been the quiet scaffolding holding a shaky structure upright. Once I stepped away, the building finally revealed all its cracks. But even cracked foundations can let in light. And I saw that light first in Jory. Her growth was the only thing keeping my heart soft. So when she told me she had registered for her first online class, something in me shifted. I did something I never do impulsively. I opened our family group chat. Typed. Dinner at my place. Sunday at 6. You're all invited. Jory replied immediately. I'll bring drinks. Dad responded hours later. Thank you for the invite. Mom said nothing. Rochelle said nothing. 2 days passed. Then Rochelle finally typed. I'll come. I can bring dessert. Thank you for trying. For once, I didn't feel drained reading her message. I didn't feel obligated. I didn't feel guilty. I just felt ready. Because for the first time in years, they were walking toward me, not dragging me toward them. And everything would happen on my terms. I spent Sunday prepping. Not because I wanted perfection. Not because I wanted to impress them, but because I needed the space to feel like mine again. I seasoned lemon paprika chicken thighs, mashed red-skinned potatoes until creamy, sautéed green beans with shallots, warmed honey wheat bread, lit soft vanilla candles, laid out wine glasses they'd gifted me years ago. When I finished, the table looked simple and warm, a reflection of the life I'd built outside of them. At 5:38 p.m., Jory arrived first. She looked different, not glamorous, not done up, just present. Centered. Confident in a quiet, steady way. She handed me a bottle of red wine and sparkling water. Didn't know what everyone drinks now, she said. I don't either, I replied. We laughed, effortlessly, a sound I hadn't shared with family in months. Then Dad and Mom pulled up. Dad carried a bottle of wine. Mom held a plastic container of store-bought salad, guilt flickering in her eyes behind forced politeness. The energy was awkward, but not hostile, which was an improvement. Then Rochelle entered. Messy bun. No makeup. Hoodie wrinkled. Twins clinging to her sides. A store-bought pie in one hand and a tote bag of kids' clothes in the other. Didn't want to assume we're staying long, she muttered. I nodded and directed her to the living room. No judgment. No argument. Dinner started slow and cautious, like everyone was scared to breathe too loudly. Jory talked about her new job. Dad mentioned cleaning out the garage. Mom talked about downsizing. Rochelle said nothing, just pushed potatoes around with her fork. No one mentioned the eviction. No one brought up money. No one dared revive January. The silence was dense. Until I broke it. I'm proud of you, Jory. Forks paused. Heads lifted. Jory blinked, surprised, like she wasn't used to anyone seeing her. You didn't wait for someone to fix things. You didn't expect rescue. You did the work. That matters. Her eyes shimmered. Her posture straightened. Something inside her opened. Mom nodded too quickly. Dad murmured agreement. Then Rochelle looked up, tears pooling. I'm sorry, she whispered. Everything froze. Not because we didn't expect the words, but because we didn't expect sincerity. I was drowning and blamed everyone else, she said. I didn't want to face myself. But I see it now. She turned to Jory. You did what I should have done. Jory didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She just said gently, it's never too late. And somehow, that was the first taste of forgiveness the Pryor family had ever shared. A real one. Not dramatic. Not manipulative. Truthful. The moment felt fragile and real. The kind you don't interrupt. So, I said what needed saying. No one is carrying anyone anymore. Mom blinked. Dad straightened. Rochelle nodded immediately. Everyone murmured agreement. No protests. No guilt tactics. Just acceptance. Dad lifted his glass. To starting over. His voice small but honest. We finished dinner in peace. The twins played quietly. Jory packed leftovers. Rochelle tied shoes, without snapping. Mom asked if I wanted to visit next weekend. I said, I'll think about it. And for the first time in years, I meant it. Because the energy in the room had shifted. They weren't grabbing for me.
They weren't leaning on me.
They were finally standing on their own feet. For the first time, they saw the edge. They saw the consequences. They saw the break. And they chose to walk differently. Not perfectly. Not magically healed. But differently. That was enough. I didn't sleep much after that Sunday dinner. Not from anxiety, not from anger, but from something that felt foreign. Relief. The images replayed in my mind long after everyone left. Jory sitting taller when I praised her. Rochelle apologizing without making excuses. Dad saying thank you on his way out. Quietly, awkwardly, but genuinely. Mom hugging me in the doorway without theatrics. No hidden agenda. No bargaining disguised as affection. It all felt unfamiliar. Tender even. Unsteady, but promising. The next morning my phone buzzed. A photo from Rochelle. She stood in a simple cafe uniform. Black shirt, name tag crooked, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her smile was small, tired, but real. Started today. Just mornings. Twins are with Mom. Thank you for last week. I won't waste this chance. I stared at the message longer than I should have. Not because I doubted her, but because for the first time, she wasn't asking for anything. Not money. Not pity. Not rescue.
Just space to grow.
I typed back. Keep going. You've got work to do. She didn't respond.
She didn't need to.
That same evening, Jory called. She asked me about budgeting resources today, she said. And childcare programs. And how to eventually afford her own place. There was a quiet pride in Jory's voice, a pride she'd earned. She's scared, she added softly, but in the right way. We talked for nearly an hour. Not about drama. Not about guilt. Not about fixing anyone. Just two adult sisters discussing schedules, goals, workloads, the way life begins to breathe again once you stop trying to hold everything together alone. Later that week, Mom invited me over for coffee. I hesitated. But I went. The house felt different. Humbled. Grounded. She'd made blueberry muffins, the kind she always baked when she wanted peace without admitting she was reaching for it. She didn't mention money once. Not a single hint toward needing anything from me. We talked about work. Life. My apartment. Her garden plans for spring. When I stood up to leave, she hugged me again. A real hug. Warm, soft, present. No manipulation in her eyes. Just a mother trying, maybe for the first time, to meet me where I stand instead of pulling me back to where she wanted me to be. 2 days later, Dad stopped by Jory's place with tools in hand, fixed a leaky pipe under her sink, didn't preach, didn't brag, didn't ask for anything, just did it because it needed doing. On his way out, he told the twins, who were visiting Jory, to stop climbing her couch cushions. He sounded like a grandfather for once, not a man trying to escape responsibility. The next weekend, we had dinner again, this time at Jory's. Everyone brought something. I brought roasted vegetables. Rochelle baked cookies slightly overdone, edges too crisp, but the effort mattered more than the taste. Mom brought a proper salad. Dad helped set the table. The twins played in the backyard, laughing louder than they had in months. Halfway through the meal, Jory leaned toward me, her voice low. "Do you realize nobody's asked you for anything tonight?" I looked around the table. She was right. No one had dropped hints. No one had passed emotional invoices. No one had acted entitled to my life or wallet. Everyone was simply contributing, existing,
Trying.
After dinner, Jory and I sat on her porch, wine glasses in hand, soft night air brushing past us. "It's strange," she said, "but I think we're finally becoming the family we always pretended to be." I chuckled. Not perfect, not close-knit. She smiled knowingly, but real. And she was right. The redemption hadn't arrived with a grand gesture. No one fell to their knees. No one gave a dramatic speech. It came quietly, through cracks created by silence and consequences. Through families learning what life looks like when the person they leaned on stops being their crutch. I don't trust them fully yet. Maybe I never will the way I once did. Boundaries don't erase history, they reshape it. But I trust that they've learned something. They saw the world collapse when I stepped back. They saw what happens when responsibility stops being optional. They saw themselves, not the version they crafted to avoid blame, but the truth. And they chose to grow. Slowly, awkwardly, imperfectly, together. For the first time in years, I'm not holding everything. We're each holding our own pieces. And somehow, that feels like the start of something honest. Something sustainable. Something whole. Families don't always break in loud, dramatic moments. Sometimes they fracture quietly in the places where expectations become chains and silence becomes survival. But healing? Healing comes in the small shifts, the boundaries we finally honor, the no's we learn to say without guilt, the steps forward we take without waiting for permission. This story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. Reclaiming peace. Reclaiming identity. Reclaiming the right to choose where your energy goes and who deserves access to it. And in the end, the Pryor family didn't mend because someone sacrificed themselves again. They mended because someone finally stopped. Stopped rescuing. Stopped absorbing. Stopped shrinking. That silence changed everything. And sometimes, the most radical love you can give your family is the love that forces them to grow, too. If you connected with this journey, don't leave quietly. Your voice matters here.
Comment below.
And have you ever been the one holding your family together? What boundaries did you have to set? Tell your story, someone out there needs it.